And now, marine weather around Alaska.
First up, today's sea ice analysis here showing thinner ice now kind of making a return trip southward here toward St. Paul Island here. The thinner ice, heavier ice still back to the north, kind of fractured here. And that pattern of southward with the northerly winds will continue to slowly move southward over the next couple of days or so. And for the forecast for tonight, low pressure tracks across the Seward Peninsula. So a lot of rain and snow associated with that, although conditions starting to improve with rain and wind diminishing for Kodiak Island. On the increase, southern Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet areas, and western Cook Inlet as well into Prince William Sound. Dry over the interior, flurries along the North Slope and Arctic coast, and quite an area of snow here developing with some gusty northeast winds for the Yukon Delta into Seward Peninsula with winter storm warnings out there. And snow and blowing snow extending all the way down to the eastern Aleutians, and it stays dry in the southeast coast. For tomorrow, especially in the afternoon, look for skies to probably cloud over for the Panhandle with a chance of rain right along the coast late in the day. And also up along the North Gulf Coast, areas of light rain there, a little heavier here for western Prince William Sound and the southern Kenai Peninsula and southern Cook Inlet in toward Kamishak Bay, Iliamna. Good shot of rain. Rain continues Kodiak Island as that front stalled out. And an area of snow here bringing several inches. Winter storm warnings from the Yukon Delta all the way up to the western Arctic coast for heavy snow. Cold air coming southward here over the eastern Bering Sea again, down in toward the Pribilofs, but not much in the way of snow, but some heavier snow for the eastern Aleutians. And for Monday, low pressure, a new center develops over the Yukon Delta, so periods of snow continue there, extending northward into Kotzebue Sound across all the Seward Peninsula, snow, St. Lawrence Island, drying out in the western Arctic coast, this area kind of breaking off north of the Brooks Range there and moving over the eastern Arctic coast and North Slope. Back to about maybe Wainwright, dry over the eastern interior, and rain for the North Gulf Coast. That front stuck to the south there, but drifting a little farther to the north here in towards southern Cook Inlet, right along Kamishak Bay across Homer, and rain across all of the southeast coast. On the south coast tomorrow for winds, south to southeast 10 to 20 knots, and the central coast southeast winds 15 to 20, and southeast or east southeast 20 to 30 knots for the north coast. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage. Sunday looking at north winds at 10, southeast 15 for Clarence Strait. And for Monday, light southeast winds at 10 knots for Clarence Strait and kind of variable to north-northeasterlies at 10 knots for the northern areas and central inside waters. South coast, southerlies 10 to 15 knots and turning southeast on the central coast, 15 to 20 knots, and then east at 20 for the north coast. Prince William Sound, east at 20 for the day tomorrow. East to northeast winds 30 knots for the North Gulf Coast. Gale warnings. Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, east winds 35 knots. Southern Cook Inlet, small craft advisories. Northeast winds at 25 knots and northeast at 20 knots for northern Cook Inlet. For the day Monday, light northeast breeze 10 knots for the area north of the Forelands and Cook Inlet. Otherwise here, southern Cook Inlet northeast at 20. East 20 Kamishak Bay, southeast 20 for the Barren Islands, and east to 20 for the western North Gulf Coast, east-southeast 25 for the east side there. Prince William Sound, 3-foot seas to go along with that east wind at 20 knots. Kodiak Island, east-southeast winds, 15 to 25 knots for the day. Sunday, east at 20, Bristol Bay, southwest 15 here for the Alaska Peninsula. And then for Monday, good northwest wind across the peninsula now, pulling that cold air southward, south or northwest at 25 to 30 knots, west 25 for Bristol Bay, and south winds 20 knots for Kodiak Island. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, northwest winds 20 to 25 knots with a few higher gusts, north 20 to 25 for Adak and Atka, and the western Aleutians, north to northeast winds at 20 to 25 knots. And then for the day Monday, Kiska to Shimia, south winds 20 to 30 knots. Otherwise for the central Aleutians here, west-northwesterlies at 20 knots. Small craft advisories for the Fox Islands, northwest winds 25 to 30 knots. East winds 15 knots for the Kuskokwim Delta coast tomorrow. Otherwise brisk wind advisories for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound for 25-knot winds from the north and northeast. Gale warnings for the Pribilof Islands. North winds 35 knots and 30-knot northerlies for St. Matthew Island. That continues through Monday for St. Matthew Island. Otherwise, winds turn westerly at 30 knots for the Pribilofs and west 25-knot winds for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Yukon Delta coast, west at 15, Norton Sound, east at 15, and just 10-knot east winds for St. Lawrence Island. And brisk wind advisories for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow at 25 knots. Also brisk wind advisories on the western coast there, northeast 25 knots. Good gales here for the Chukchi Sea, northerlies at 35 to 40 knots. And for the outlook on Monday, still pretty windy here with north to northeast winds at 30 to 35 knots for the Chukchi Sea. Brisk wind advisories, central western Arctic coast at 25 knots from the north. West winds 20 knots for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast.